So I'm just lounging here with my girl, Angelina. She's my lighting and focus check girl. And I'm thinking, geez, not supposed to touch my face. Just thinking, what can we photographers do while we're self-isolated and social distance? Something we can do indoors. Well, I've got an idea for you. Okay, dummy, beat it. Like many others stuck mostly inside, I went to YouTube to get some inspiration, and there's a channel called The Art of Photography, which is well worth checking out if you haven't already. And in that, he's doing a weekly challenge, and to sort of set the stage for his weekly challenge, he said, why don't we look at window light, how light comes in. I've got some side light here, as you can see, and that's basically what he's talking about. If you're photographing things inside, can you use natural light? So I began to think about that and thought, yeah, it's a great idea, but I wanted to take it a step further. I thought, what if you actually showed the progression of sunlight during the afternoon or whatever as it crossed an object? So in other words, doing a time lapse. So this particular exercise I'm going to show you is how to use the GVM slider to do a time lapse rotating around an object, in this case a guitar, which has the sunlight streaking across it or moving across it as time progresses. So you don't have to have a slider. You can do this just with a camera that has either a built-in intervalometer or has an external intervalometer that you can plug into it. And it should be an interesting exercise. So let's get into the details of how we do that. So the effect I was going for was to have the camera appear to rotate around the guitar as the sun is moving across it. So you get kind of two effects in one, which is the sun moving in the time lapse and the camera actually changing its perspective. So there's two ways you can set this up. There is a bar running down the middle of the slider, which controls the carriage. And if you undo these knobs at the end and slide the bar or move the bar so that it's angled one way or the other, depends on how you do it, you'll either get a panoramic mode where the camera will do this. So it's always it's trying to cover an entire scene. Whereas the way I've got it set up now is so that it does what's called parallax or interview mode, commonly known as interview mode. And you'll see that the camera, instead of doing a panoramic where it's sweeping across, it's now always aimed at the object in the center. In this case, it's the camera lens on the camera you're watching this on. Now, because we're photographing or doing a time lapse, I should say, of a relatively small object, it's not a large landscape or anything like that, this slider is going to be relatively close to the object. In this case, the guitar is going to be about 24 inches approximately away from the plane of focus of this camera. So normally, if you're doing an interview where you're not that close to the subject, you try to use the entire travel of the slider carriage, or the slider I should say. In this case, we're only going to be using about 1 foot of travel. So I have set my start and end points accordingly. So in other words, when I start the process, the camera will index, it'll move, and through this cable, it will, that's plugged into the controller at this end, it will take a photograph, step again, take another photograph, step and take a photograph. And by the time it gets to the end of the stop point that I've set, it will stop taking pictures. By the way, never do this. Never manually move the carriage once the power is applied to the controller, because then the controller is trying to drive the stepper motor. So if you force it by hand like this, you may be burning out the stepper motor in the carriage.
each one of these yellow stickies has the time that the shadow of the window frame touched this edge. So this is 2:30, 2:40 in the afternoon, 2:50 in the afternoon. And each one of them is about 2 inches apart. So if I wanted to photograph that shadow or that edge going from this side to approximately here, where my thumb is, that's about 12 inches. So since each of these intervals is 2 inches, that means there's six of these intervals to get across to the other side. And each interval is 10 minutes. This is, like I said, 2:30, 2:40, 2:50. So that's how I ended up with 60 minutes for the entire sequence to go across here. Let's say I want to turn this into an 8-second video segment. I'm shooting at 24 frames a second, so if I wanted 8 seconds of video, 8 times 24 is 192. So that's the number of frames that I will have to shoot during my time-lapse sequence. I'm going to round that 192 up to 200 for convenience sake. And I'll go into the GVM controller and set the number of shots to 200. We previously determined that it would take about 60 minutes for the light of the sun to transit right across the face of the guitar. And so 60 minutes is 3,600 seconds. Now if we divide that 3,600 seconds by the number of frames we're shooting, which is 200, that gives us 18 seconds. Now I'm going to actually set on the GVM controller the stop time to about 20 seconds. Let's talk about the settings. Now these are kind of arbitrary and something you're going to have to experiment with, because as I said, I'm going to make this thing travel over about a foot distance. So I've set my stop and end points. And by the way, once you turn off the controller, you will lose those start and end points, so be careful with that. You'll have to reprogram it every time you power the controller up. So the distance actually that the camera will, or the carriage rather, will move depends on a couple of parameters. One's called speed and one's called duration. Now I've found that using 70% and for the speed and 1/10 of a second for the duration, that it will move far enough between each shot that over approximately a 1-foot distance it will give me about 200 shots, which is what I'm going for. The duration is the time that you want between shots. We want to allow the sun to move a little bit, and we've calculated that to be about 18 seconds. So I set that stop time, as it's called, to about 20 seconds, because within that stop time, another parameter that they've poorly labeled as time-lapse, it's very misleading, but that means the time between when the carriage stops moving after it's indexed and when it triggers the shutter through this cable. So you want this thing to kind of settle down a little bit in its motion before you actually open the shutter. But then it will wait another 19 seconds or so in a 20-second stop time before it indexes again. Well, I hope that was a fun exercise for you. Again, you don't need to have a slider. That's just something that gave a little bit more drama to the scene. But taking a time lapse of the sun crossing an object is quite compelling. And so all you need to do is set up your intervalometer to take a shot every few seconds using the method I outlined with you is one way of doing it. And if you enjoyed this content, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like what you see on this channel, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more videos.
Thanks for watching.